Importance of orientation and onboarding is what I'll be sharing with you primarily today. And one of the things with orientation and onboarding is many people think that they're the same thing. However, there's a little bit of a difference, in a little bit of a difference in the sense of time constraints and the time it takes and whatnot. And we will delve into that as we go forward. Okay, everybody plays a role in orientation and onboarding. We'll talk about what orientation is. We'll share a little bit about what onboarding is and what the differences are. And we're going to look at this through the lens of how can we help organizations retain quality direct support professionals. So orientation is one key piece that helps start that process. Onboarding is a little bit longer process that we'll discuss that helps kind of with that maintenance and care and making sure folks are really progressing throughout the organization as things move forward. Our goals for today: define onboarding and explain its true purpose. Explain orientation and what that is and what the difference is. Many of you have ideas and probably already have good orientation programs in place. Some of you are probably, even without knowing it, doing some very good onboarding things, and that's part of why I like using the chat feature, because I like to hear what you already have going on. That's also a great opportunity for those of you that are in any region of Tennessee to be able to share your onboarding experiences with each other, because really it's a community of practice kind of concept that we're hoping to have happen as things go forward. Discuss the role of the frontline supervisor in orientation and onboarding, how key that person is. Orientation and onboarding are something that everybody needs to be a part of at your organization, and we'll go into a little bit more depth on that. Describe ways to improve onboarding and orientation practices. So we'll talk a little bit about some ways that we can make it better, and then we'll share examples of a couple of successful onboarding orientation practices that we're aware of. They're not the only ones that are out there, but there are a couple of things that we feel really fit well with processes that we're putting in place for your TA consultants to support you in moving forward with your support of direct support professionals and retaining them. Okay. Now, here comes that first time I'm going to use the chat feature. And so if you've got hopefully a pencil and a piece of paper or something, or just think in your mind, I'm going to take you through a handful of questions here. And I'm just going to pause in between, and I want you to think of at least one thing for each question that pops into your mind. So, and then at the end, we're going to actually have a further question that will be what you're going to answer into the chat feature based on what you thought. So first of all, your first day on the job, any job that you started, in particular if it was your first direct support professional job, because I know most everybody on this call probably at some point provided direct support, what went well? Next, what didn't go so well? Was there one thing that you just kind of wished had been different? Kind of jot that down or think on that. What made you want to stay? Many of you have furthered your careers in the field. Something with that first job probably made you want to stay. What was that thing? Conversely, what made you maybe not want to stay? What were some of the frustrating things that you saw that that maybe were things that weren't something that you would want to continue in your career? Now, hopefully you have an answer in your mind or jotted on a piece of paper to each of those 4 questions, or a couple of them. Just something that kind of gives you some food for thought. Now comes the part where I would like you to use the chat feature. And I'll have Sarah pop in if she would be willing to, and kind of give me some of the responses that people had. And then we can talk a little bit about how those are impacting, and they'll lead us into the discussion about orientation and onboarding quite smoothly. So here's the final question. Knowing what you know now, here's what you're going to answer. What suggestions might you make about creating a great first day for a new direct support professional and frontline supervisor? So we're going to be starting that day together, most likely. What are some things that you would suggest that would create a great first day? And we'll give you probably about 30 seconds to a minute. I suppose I could probably hum the Jeopardy theme for you if that would help, but we'll just have a few minutes of silence. Oh, actually, I'm seeing the chat feature, so I can actually look at what's here too. All right. So Sarah's not going to have to pop in here. I can kind of actually do it myself. How nice. All right. Some things that I'm hearing, and okay. Ooh, lots of them here. Thank you, folks. All right, let me go. More positivity would be a thing that people could get connected with. A focus on the individual and why they are interested in the position. Very good point. A lot of times, being a person-centered thinking trainer, I always think about we have to be person-centered not only with the individuals we support, but we have to have that vision and that view of the direct support professional, because if we do that, we're going to have an opportunity to really make sure that the match is correct for where they're working, who they're supporting, and who they might be working with. And let's see, the supervisor being present for at least part of the workday. Okay, that's a good thing in the sense that oftentimes if someone isn't there, there's no person to actually bounce some things off of. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So I'm glad that one came up. Having assigned tenured staff to work with to help with any questions. Very good. We'll talk a little bit about that concept of mentoring and pairing up a staff person who might have some similar experiences in life and or just be a good person to help a person learn the skills that they need to do the job. Having and communicating an orientation plan. Oftentimes that can be a real struggle. I know I've had jobs where I've gone in and there's nothing in writing. It's just kind of all by the seat of the pants. It worked, but it wasn't one of those situations where I felt like I was getting what I needed as a new employee, and it took me just a little bit longer to get that comfort level in what I was doing. Somebody that's going to train the person and not let them drown. Again, that fits in very well with what we had earlier with just having that mentor type of person there that can help it. Feeling valued. Key part of the work that folks do is that you feel valued. And one of the things that I always talk about when I look at that is what's the why of what you do? What's the why of the organization? Why does the organization do what they do? How can those two things be married together in a way that makes it so that individual that's supporting folks in your setting, whatever it may be, is feeling valued? Someone to have a point person for the first day. Absolutely. It comes into that either frontline supervisor or a peer mentor or someone like that being available. All right. Thank you, folks. And you've all hit on a lot of great things that are going to make that first day that much better for that frontline supervisor and that direct support professional in particular. Again, Those are things that are really good retention strategies. All right. Okay, come on, forward, you bugger. There it goes. What about your last day on the job? Why did you leave? Did you have any opportunity to share that information on why you left? Did you have an exit interview? Was there a survey or a questionnaire that pulled that information for you? It's important to find out why a person wants to work in the field and why a person has worked in the field. But as you're trying to develop your orientation and or onboarding plan, it's also really good to gather the type of data that says, why are people leaving? I believe on one of the earlier webinars I was sitting in on, they talked about that particular piece and how sometimes, knowing why people leave is the thing that's going to help you develop a better strategy for moving forward with the folks that you keep. And sometimes it's as simple as just, somebody needs to get a job that pays more. Somebody needs to they move. Their partner or their significant other gets a job elsewhere, those types of things. But sometimes there's something that can be a really great learning experience for the organization that could say, hey, maybe we can do this particular piece a little bit differently. Maybe we can look at what this person's discontent was about and why they left, if it was a discontent situation, and grow from that as an organization and become better at supporting not only our direct support professionals and frontline supervisors, but the people who we ultimately are supporting, and that's the folks that are your charges. All right, in the beginning. Okay, many of you, I think if I'm right, this one's in East Tennessee, Bristol Motor Speedway, and I pulled up the start-finish line. In the beginning, there's always that start of what's got to go on. Effective in training and orientation is not only improves performance of the direct support professional, but it also improves the chances that new employees will stay on a job longer, which is really kind of the ultimate goal. It's that retention that we're after. Most training offered to direct support professionals is designed to meet state and federal guidelines. And employers need, rather than meeting the needs of the person receiving the supports or the needs of the employee. So one of the things that we're always promoting is that you want to have a good balance in that. And with some of the answers you guys gave in the chat earlier, it shows me that you guys are already on board with the concept of, we need to meet those requirements that help us get the bills paid, that help us get the funding that we need to provide supports. But it also is important to have training that's going to help show that you value that individual as a direct support professional. You value that frontline supervisor and what they bring to the table to ensure that you retain quality folks. Starting a new job can be emotional. All of these things are important, but it's also important to provide support and care to the new employees so that they feel welcome. Now, one of the things that I pulled up, why I pulled up Bristol's start-finish line is it's the start, but it's also a finish. And when you finish, there's always that opportunity to evaluate how a thing went. A race, that's what's going to happen. The team that wins is going to evaluate why it went well. The teams that finish further back are going to figure out what were some of the things we could do better. You're always going to be looking to do that. And anytime that you're supporting a new direct support professional, there's going to be those pieces along the way where, oops, we finished that piece. We're starting this piece. Okay, what's next? And we'll get into a little bit more of that when we talk about not only orientation, but the whole onboarding process as well. Okay, so when a new direct support professional comes in, oftentimes they're coming in, and here's kind of the main questions. What do I need to know to do my job well? What are those tangible things that I'm going to have to make sure I'm aware of? And those are oftentimes, some of them are very much set. It's here's the routines of the day. Here's the routines of the individual we support. Here's the routine of the setting, whether it's a day program or a residential setting. There's going to be pieces that are just, well, here's kind of how the days normally go. So making sure that that's a real piece and a real part of how you train someone is important. What's expected of me? And those expectations are going to vary with a new direct support professional if you're doing it in a way that's person-centered, based on where that person is and where they're coming from as a new hire. So looking at what's expected of the individual and making sure that it's tailored to kind of fit where they're at, and then building from there is a real key piece. How do I know what is expected of me? Obviously, that communication that came up during the chat earlier when we talked about that orientation process was, how do I know? And that communication piece is really key. So having a really good communication strategy is a real important piece for folks that are new to the job and frontline supervisors, and frankly, anyone that's a part of the organization. The other person that always should be a part of this communication thing is the individual supported. The communication and the methods of communication to really support an individual are going to be driven by them. So it's important to make sure that gets rolled into how this starts out as well. Who can I turn to if I have questions? A number of people said, another staff person that you've got that's got some experience, making sure that a person's paired up with them. An actual setup mentor. One of the places where setting up a mentor is really important is, say you have a person that's coming in as an English language learner, someone for whom this isn't their, they've moved to Tennessee from somewhere else in the world, and they're able to speak English, but it's always nice if there's someone else that might be able to communicate with them in their native tongue as well, because it just helps that having that similar experience. Someone that's already been through it is going to be a really great person to have paired up. And sometimes that's not necessarily possible, but you always want to take into account, again, where that individual is coming from. And will I fit in is a really big question that a lot of direct support professionals, when they first come to the field, are wondering about. And that's oftentimes, that's going to come from the actual setting. Whoever's working at that particular setting are going to be the people that help that person fit in. So, there's strategies to help with that. I'm a big proponent of using one-page profiles, not only for our individuals we support, but staff, to be able to kind of know, how does this person, how can I best support this individual in doing their job? And sometimes that communication, and we do this with our team, and I think you saw many of the one-page profiles when folks came out to visit you in Tennessee. And those things can really be helpful to support your peers as well. What does a frontline supervisor, what are they asking with this new person? You go back to person's what do I need to know about my job to do it well? Well, the frontline supervisor also needs to know, what does that employee need to know to do their job well? How can I support them in doing this job well? What do they already know? I mean, here's where assessment comes in. And one of the things that we often talk about with assessment is there's many tools out there, and I know that we have given you one, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. There's a direct support assessment tool that we recommend that is a nice self-assessment that you could go through and have the individual do, and then it will help the frontline supervisor kind of gather some of that information. What do they need to learn? Where are the things that they have that are going to be the learning moments for them, and where do we build on those things that they already know to help support that learning? Kind of a real key piece there is that building on what the person knows, because that shows the value. Someone had brought that up in the chat too, that the value, to value the individual is really important, and I totally agree. And that's one of those things that can do that. How can I support them and make them feel comfortable? Again, something that's really important in order to get that done is is, the leadership of the frontline supervisor, but also how do you engage the rest of the team that's working in that particular setting. Okay, orientation is an event. Here's a place of course, this was at the old Ryman, this photo. This is a place I still have yet to get. I do want to get to the Grand Ole Opry someday in my life and see it. And I want to see the new space as well. But, I used to watch it on TV when I was a kid and from the old Ryman Auditorium. And it was kind of a fun thing to see. All these great musicians up there doing their thing. Well, that event had to happen. And there needed to be some things done to make that event work. So I'm going to use a little bit of analogy here. In a moment, I'll get into kind of an Opry analogy that will kind of hopefully make my points a little bit more. But orientation is an event that is a part of the onboarding process. It covers the introductions to people, of course, that are being supported, the job, the coworkers, the human resources side of it. There's always that. You've got to get all the paperwork done so the person can actually get paid and get any benefits that might be there as well. And it's often one of the phases of what we call onboarding. It's often, one of the first phases, basically, because you've done all the interviewing, and I know that you've had many of you probably sat in on the informational interviewing piece that Chet had presented a month or so ago. That's a really good piece too, is to use that interviewing piece and feed into what the orientation is. All right. Are there ways you can introduce staff and the person supported that focus on things that are important to both the person and the person being supported? And here's where I think that, again, I go back to my person-centered background and talk about matching. Oftentimes we want to try and find those things where we can set up matches. And it may take more of the onboarding process to find a match, but you might just in orientation, if you've really done your assessment of the individual and had some good conversation around what's important to the individual that's in front of you as a direct support professional, you might find that you have the right fit for them to be supporting an individual. And again, the good direct support professional is going to be able to support anyone. Yet, when you have a good match, it's one of the things that is most known for keeping retention happening, because the individual being supported is really excited and happy to be supported by this DSP, and the DSP is having a great time working with that individual. So, all right. My Opry analogy. What happens when the Opry would put together one of their shows? The individuals that are being supported are kind of like the folks in the band. I always look at it that way. They're kind of like the folks in the band, the folks that are brought in to be on stage and perform what's going on. The folks supporting the production are important, and that would be kind of, I would say the folks that are support staff, direct support professionals, frontline supervisors, and they need to know and learn about what those musicians are going to need to be able to put on a really good show. Well, our show, in the case of individuals we support, is the life that the individual wants to lead is being moved towards. Granted, sometimes it's going to take some steps, it's going to take some work and some time for folks to get all of the pieces that they want, but they're moving towards and they're working towards living the life of their choice. And that's where the direct support professional comes in. They're that production support. The organization, introduction to the history and importance of it. The history, Opry, the history of the Opry is so important to Tennessee and to country music, like amazingly so. Well, the history of your organization and the why of your organization and why you do what you do is really important for this individual who's coming into work as a direct support professional to know about. So your visions and your missions and the things that you do that drive your organization and how everything you do leads towards that better life for the individual you support, AKA the show, you need to have that tied there. And you want to try and tie not only what you know and what you do in your why, but you want to tie in the why of the individual that's working as a direct support professional. Oftentimes they're going to be able to tell you why they chose to come work for you. And oftentimes there is going to be a tie. There is going to be a way where you can kind of say, here's our vision together, and here's how we get there. And that can help with retention. Introduction to the work site and expectations. Obviously with the new Opry House or the Ryman, the new musicians came in, they had to kind of get the tour, get all of that. You're going to be doing the same thing with your direct support professionals in whatever role that they have. All right. So orientation is kind of, again, that's that event. It's kind of a one-time thing, although I always say there's new orientation that's going to happen sometimes if you end up with a new role within the organization. So sometimes somebody might move to a different location and work at a different location. You may have some reorientation to do. Probably not as long, probably not as much, because the person already is oriented to the organization, but there's going to be orientation that may need to happen for that particular home. Who's being supported, what they're needing the most of, and orientation to the new staff and the culture of that particular location. Right. Onboarding is a process. This is the Mississippi Queen. I'm pretty sure the Mississippi Queen back in the day traveled through Memphis. And we have a hand raise. Sarah, if you'd check that out for me, I'd appreciate it. All right. Onboarding is a process, but this is the Mississippi Queen. I'm sure she went by Memphis a time or two in her day. But onboarding is something that we want to focus on for our need in onboarding and how it's different than orientation. Purpose of onboarding is to prepare, orient, integrate, and engage. And engagement is one of the pieces that's really important. And engagement is about new hires. Help them find their place within the team and fit in. It helps them feel welcomed and supported. It helps them become productive workers in the shortest time possible. And that's the key. We want to make sure that we're building the skill set, building the individual's value within the organization over time. And that's where onboarding is key. That's the difference than orientation, is that it takes that time, but it's all about a strategic plan to make sure that you're bringing that person along and helping them to really become the direct support professional you need them to be. It's a process of, again, of socializing and engaging. It's a comprehensive. Oftentimes, a true onboarding process is going to last months, a year, maybe 18 months, that type of a thing. But if you have someone that's working for you that long, it's really worth it because you can keep them longer if you've gone through a really solid onboarding process. It builds great attitudes and it increases the knowledge and skills for the job. It improves productivity, decreases stress. How many people out there are having stress right now with the coronavirus and what's going on and how that's adding to everything that we've been dealing with? It adds another level of stress, and we have to kind of take that into account as we're moving forward with things right now. And hopefully you all have developed strategies over time, and like all of us, by hook or crook, we're by the seat of our pants, we're doing what we can to support the folks that are providing direct support is in that essential role. All right, so we'll get a little bit more into onboarding in a second, but I want to talk about the role of the frontline supervisor. Here's my analogy as a drum major. Drum major oftentimes comes into an organization or into the band, or they've been a member of a band somewhere here, University of Tennessee, and they were a member of that band. They were part of the section. They may have been a section leader, but that frontline supervisor has applied for, or in some way been promoted to that supervisory role. And when they're promoted to that role, there's new expectations, and they need to really be able to do some things in particular around onboarding an individual into an organization who's going to be working with them and with the folks that they support. roles that they have. Welcome that frontline, or welcome that new individual. Support them, engage a new DSP in the job and the organization. So that whole thing, like we talked about earlier, making sure that you kind of getting what's the vision and mission of the organization, and bringing it all the way down to how is that being seen in providing that direct support. Teach and train on required work skills, so the real skill set. So medication training, training on very specific protocols of someone who is needing to use a feeding tube to get nourishment. What are the training required pieces for those specific work skills? The communication. I know all organizations that I've worked with, residential or recreation, and day supports in all my time working in the field, communication was one of the things that we had to really focus on well. And we always had to have communication. In particular, where I struggled and where we struggled was with some of our residential supports, is how is communication going between shifts, because there's so many shift changes there. So communication clearly and making sure that there's a good plan in place for that is a really key important for a frontline supervisor. Oftentimes organizations have a protocol that helps that FLS, but acclimating a new person to that is a really key. Providing regular check-ins and feedback on progress. So important for a frontline supervisor to check in with folks. I loved in the chat when I asked the question earlier how we could improve things. Someone had said that that whole having the frontline supervisor there for at least half a day. Having that frontline supervisor there so they can see where the person is maybe struggling, or where they can see where the person is doing well and giving them positive feedback on those things that are going well. It's so important to really balance that so that you're able to make the person feel valued, yet still offer them the opportunity to continue to grow in the role of direct support. Listening. One of the things that I think that many of us don't do as well as we could, and I forget who the quote is, but we don't always listen like we should. You really need to turn off everything else, which can be really hard, especially during the current times, and listen to what the person's struggling with, what they're successful and what we're feeling good about, and really put your ears on to listen, to hear what's needed rather than listen to respond. That's the piece that sometimes I know happens a lot. We're listening to respond before we really truly listen to what a person's asking us. So, all right. Another frontline supervisor piece is being a role model, showing a person how you would like them to actually work with folks with disabilities that they support, or folks who are aging, or folks who are needing any kind of support. Also role modeling how to work with the peers, work with direct support professionals in the organization. It's a real key piece. And oftentimes your frontline supervisors, when you've selected them, if they've been hired from within, odds are they're a person that you've already seen that skill set in, and you value them for that, and that's part of why you've brought them in. But if you're bringing in a new frontline supervisor, you're going to want to use the informational interviewing piece that Chet was talking about to make sure that the experiential part tells you that a person already comes with some of those skills. Coach and mentor is a real key piece, both in orientation and onboarding, that the frontline supervisor does. But that coaching and mentoring might be something that's done, as we talked about earlier, by another peer or someone that is a skilled worker already. Sometimes it feels a little less intrusive if it's that mentor versus the supervisor being right there. Show appreciation and respect for all the people that you support, direct support professionals, and the folks that you serve. Be available. That can sometimes be the hardest thing for a frontline supervisor to do, is be available, because oftentimes I know in my experience, people are supporting a number of different settings, and to be available for everybody at all of those settings can sometimes be a bit of a juggling game. But do the best you can. Find ways in which you can make yourself available, even if it's, I have certain times of certain days that, here's I got my phone on, call, or text me, or however your supervisors and your teams would like to make that work. Okay, you've already seen this slide, but I'm going to go through it quickly again. Thinking back to your first day on the job, what went well, what didn't go so well, what made you want to stay, what made you not want to stay. Knowing what you know now, what suggestions might you make about creating a great first day for new direct support professionals and frontline supervisors? We kind of talked about that. Okay, there it goes. Here's some information from some folks that we've talked about. We've talked to that were coming into direct support roles. And here's some of the things that they were saying. So some of the things that you guys brought up in the chat are exactly what we had here. Getting to know people supported is one of the things that was hard. Figuring out routines and duties was difficult. And it sometimes takes a lot of time to really get to the point where you can really focus in on those routines and duties and really get acclimated to everyone, because if you're supporting one person, they're going to have a number of routines and duties that you're going to need to do for them. But if you're in a setting where you're supporting multiple people, again, that can become a bit of a juggling game too. Getting to know other staff members was one of the hard things for some. So having ways for staff folks to really share and grow together is important. Again, I love the one-page profile concept, because it helps people to really understand how to support each other more quickly. And it's also a lot less obtrusive than, just some sort of, list of here's things that you got to do. If all of a sudden it's like, okay, here's how we can work together. You've got this skill, you're really good at that, or you struggle with this, but that's one of my strengths. I can support you in that, and helping to find that happen. Navigating team dynamics can be a real struggle. I know I've been in situations where there can be some discontent and some struggles for folks. Adjusting to new schedules, always a tough thing. Learning and remembering. That memory thing can be a real struggle for folks. And I always like to think about that one, not only from the standpoint of where an individual comes from, because everybody learns in different ways, but it's also that here's where I also draw on that piece. If someone's coming from another country and they're doing direct support now, sometimes it takes a little longer because the whole systematic approach might have been different where they come from. Learning about those things and those cultural differences is really an important thing to do too, because you might be able to find some ways to really even support folks better. Environmental protocols, knowing who to ask. So that, who's the person I can talk to, that frontline supervisor, that peer mentor, someone at HR, however your organization likes to set it up. On the job stressors, we all have them. When I was looking for fun little pictures, this guy just kind of made me chuckle, because that sometimes is me when the stress gets a little bit high. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stressors we run into. Demands and pressures mismatched to current knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Happens a lot with new direct support professionals. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you're learning, and if you're coming in brand new, there's not a knowledge base yet. So it's a matter of trying to tie in what knowledge a person comes in with. And like I was doing with the analogies to the Grand Ole Opry or something like that, you might, as the person supporting that new direct support professional, want to look at, okay, what part of their life that they come from might have an analogy I can use that will help them understand that, you got some skills here already and they're transferable. So demands on those pressure, or that, and the skills and the attitudes are really kind of a thing that can add stress. Lack of support from supervisors or coworkers can be a real struggle. I know in some settings it can be even more of a struggle when someone's feeling like they're out there working on an island. Finding the ways to make that be a little bit less of a struggle for folks is important too. So, you know, some things I've seen people do is they'll have, you know, we're getting to this wonderful thing with everybody with the stay-at-home orders of using, you know, online technology. You know, maybe you have some chat meetings and chat rooms and things like that, where people can kind of just have those conversations with each other virtually. Sometimes that's a great way to make things a little bit less stressful for that new person if they have a couple people they can just do a quick phone chat with. Lack of control over work processes. Sometimes our processes that we put in place, you know, we put them in place for a reason, and over time, they've just become the way that we do business. I'm going to challenge you to look at those processes. If one comes up and it's someone's having a struggle with it, and they're feeling a lack of control over that process, whether it's a new direct support professional or someone else in your organization, look at where that process comes from. Because sometimes the processes are very valid, and it's, you know, this is a regulation, we have to do it this way. But sometimes it could be just someone's interpretation through time, and there may be another way to do it that would be easy, be able to make it more feel like the individuals that are providing support are in a little bit more control. A couple of resources here. Frontline Initiative, which is one of the publications that we do in collaboration with the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, just put out, a few months ago, our issue on self-care. Go check that out. It's a great resource for helping DSPs to kind of figure out how to take care of themselves, especially in a time like now where people are really extra stressed because of what's going on in the world. World Health Organization has a really great page on stress in the workplace that could go in even more depth for you. And I'm not going to go into that fully. I'm just going to share that resource for you. Now I'm going to share a couple of little things that we offer that are good strategies. So remember, one of the goals was to give you a couple strategies. Realistic orientation programs for new employees, sometimes called ropes, is one of those strategies. And what it does is, you know, it tells you what you should be doing, providing realistic information about initial stressors, providing general support and assurance, so the one-on-one small groups. So we talked a little bit on the last slide about some of that. Demonstrate, discuss, and rehearse various coping skills. Sometimes that's a really good way for people to learn, is to really have some role-playing games, some things that, you know, some people that's not their thing, and that's okay. Sometimes those are the people that might need to kind of watch it and see what it is. But, you know, sometimes that can be a really great way to help people deal with stress. Change things about the symptoms and the stress, manage the symptoms, finding those different resources. And again, that World Health article is a really good spot to start for some of these. Teach self-control through thoughts and feelings. One of the places I always think that our stressors can get high is when we as individuals providing support don't always, or we don't always check our biases at the door, and we sometimes will add stress to something, or because we are thinking of it through our lens as opposed to the lens of the person we support. Another thing that we sometimes do that it can be a real struggle is, oh geez, I just lost that thought. Well, it'll come back to me. I'll bring it back in a second. Target information about stressors to specific new staff. So each person is going to have their own stressors. How do you support them with their stressors that they might have? Important. Another model, this is an actual model that is a instructional design model, and this is what we would use to actually develop an onboarding process. So it begins with analyze. Then it goes into design, develop, implement, evaluate. And one of the things that I always talk about with the ADDIE model is you can do it from any of these spaces, you always want to start with analyzing the very first time. But you may get to design, and you're about to go into develop, and you get in something that doesn't seem to quite fit right. You may do a quick evaluation of, gee, why isn't that going forward as we thought it would? And you can go into the cycle in any place, but it always is about really that analysis and that piece first. So getting started. If you're going to build one that's based on ADDIE, I look at these particular pieces that are kind of our bullet points that we've used with you before. Building a strategic plan for onboarding and orientation. Assess the needs of a new DSP. That's where that direct support professional skills assessment, self-assessment thing can come into play. Someone can come in there and you can actually have them use that skills assessment to kind of let you know kind of where they're coming from. And so you'll be able to, as a supervisor, frontline supervisor or other supervisor, support them better. What competencies and skills are needed for the job? So you're going to have to be using those. That's all. These are all a part of the assessment. This first bit, this whole first page is really the assessment. Set training priorities and timelines. Tailor the training programs based on the individual needs of the direct support professionals. And then the last one is and then you're going to have some evaluation of your current orientation and onboarding practices. Look at what you're already doing. What can you do differently? What can you add that will make it that much stronger for the individuals you're bringing in? Design a written plan for onboarding. So really this is about coming up with, after you've done all that analysis, okay, what's our plan going to be? What are we going to write down? How are we going to, timeline this thing out, make it work? Define a clear future vision, learning objectives, goals, and timelines. Really important to have all of those pieces in your development process. And then you're going to give it a go. You're going to implement the program. And once you implement it, you're going to come back and you're going to evaluate, okay, how did that work? What worked, what didn't work? What will we do differently next time? What's our next step? You're going to go into those things. So many of those things are really, really an important piece. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. Frontline supervisors onboarding strategies. Here's some things that some people have done. You've probably done others as well. And we're getting short on time because I talk a lot. And so I'm not going to go with the whole using the chat feature again, but you can think of things that you might have done that would also fit into this onboarding strategy piece that are good things that would be really wonderful to share amongst the teams within each region as you move forward. But welcome gifts, mugs, pens, balloons, those types of things. Job shadowing is a really key piece. It can be helpful. So that someone talked about having that staff with this that's been really successful that can kind of be shadowed. It helps a person become more acclimated. Differential information based on experience. Theirs were sometimes that where the individual's coming from another culture and or just another type of field maybe. That differential experience is something that you want to try and draw from so that you can support the person in building their skills for your direct support role. Use interaction and storytelling. Pace the information. You may have to pace it based on what each individual direct support professional comes to the table with. If you did that assessment, you'll kind of know, okay, well, here's where this person's going to have strengths. I can probably give them things that are going to support that right away. Here's where they're going to need some additional support. Okay, that might come later in the plan, but here's some things I can do to build towards that. Follow up with the new hires. Always important to do those follow-up pieces. Frontline supervisor strategy, one of the ones I love is reuniting orientation cohorts. Do you ever have a cohort of orientation where you've got maybe 4 or 5 people and they share that initial orientation piece with HR, and or they share an orientation piece in a setting where they're actually going to provide supports, make sure that those folks get a chance to chat and learn from each other as well, because sometimes that new eye that's there is going to be able to learn as much from another person who's experienced exactly what they're experiencing at that time, that much more. Use adult learning principles to reach different learning styles. We all can go back and think about the learning styles of when we were kids, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic. But here in adult learning, not only is there that, there's what a person's process is. Some people are big doers. They got to do it first, and then they can come back and assess, evaluate, and learn from that. Others are the analyzers. They're going to they want all the detail before they move. And then others are just watchers. They need to see it first. And there's strengths to each of those styles. And you need to have a team where you have all of those styles there. So we can go into more depth on that at some point. I can give you other resources. People who've taken person-centered practices probably already have seen some of those. Provide concrete strategies for stress. Assign the mentor, and introduce and involve people that are supported, consumers, family members, in the process too, in the onboarding. The more you get to know the people that are being supported through different lenses, the better you're going to be at supporting them. Okay, our goals for today, and we're wrapping up here. We defined onboarding and explained its true purpose. We've explained orientation. We've discussed the role of frontline supervisor in orientation and onboarding. We've described a couple ways to improve onboarding and orientation practices. And I shared a couple of examples of onboard and orientation practices. So hopefully you've taken enough from those that you're going to feel comfortable. And here's the resources that I talked about, many of them. The links are in here. And I'm going to throw it out for questions. Did we have any questions? And we're running behind, so give me one or two quick ones, Sarah.
Well, yep, we just have a couple questions so far, but if you have questions you want to put in the chat box. Otherwise, you can always reach out to us. Feel free to talk to your consultants as well afterwards. Now, Mark, there was one question about an organization using a mentoring process to support new DSPs on the job. When do you suggest that new staff meet their mentor? To me personally, I'm always like, the earlier in the process, the better. Mm-hmm. If you've got it, oftentimes you've selected a mentor that really wants to support new people anyway. So, I would obviously, the way that orientation worked back when I was in leadership, oftentimes you would have a lot of HR orientation, but that mentor is probably going to be somebody that's working at the site where the individual is going to be working. So, I might make that introduction right away at the first visit to that site and say, here's a person, they don't have to do a lot right then, but here's so-and-so. They're going to be kind of someone that I'm going to pair you up with to kind of be a mentor where you can ask questions, maybe shadow for a while and learn from that individual. Mm-hmm. So I would say early on, I'm not going to give you an exact time because a lot of it's going to depend on how your organization does things, but as early as possible. Okay, thank you. Another question that we had, now you've talked about a lot of different people to include, but just to recap, who should be involved in leading orientation and onboarding?
Well, my nirvana is always to have people supported, involved in some fashion with this. Mm-hmm. So I think that when Chet did the interviewing piece, you talked about having folks involved with interviewing as well. Well, if that person has been involved in that interviewing process, keep them involved in the orientation and onboarding. A person who's receiving supports is going to probably be the best person to share their routines and the things that they do in a way that they like to do it, because they're the individual that's going to be supported. So I think in that particular aspect, it's important to have the individual that's being supported. Family members, if a family member is really involved in someone that is that great influence, great, because that develops that relationship for the family member and the direct support professional as well. And that's really important. I think that you definitely, obviously, the frontline supervisor, staff that they're going to work with, if there's a staff or two
that mentor that you may have selected is great. But if you don't even have a mentor program, just having a staff or two involved that, just know this person's new, that that they're going to be a good role model for the individual, is sometimes important to have in that. And the rest of the staff team is really important to that ongoing onboarding process. And then, you do need leadership involved. And here's where I'm always a proponent of, that it's good for the CEO and or the manager of the unit or whatever to meet new individuals, direct support professionals, and really show that they support them as well, and really have that discussion about vision and values and how that individual's valued already as a new DSP, and how they're going to work together to bring value to the lives of people supported.
Great, thank you. We did have a comment that somebody had mentoring at the first home that she worked at, and she said it was the best training she ever had.
Yep.
Well, I think that really shows to like what you were saying. We have orientation, which is great, but that onboarding component where it continues on, that extra support. I think that's something we've seen multiple times to be very helpful for DSP.
Well, the other piece of onboarding, Sarah, of course, I can't stop talking. The other piece of onboarding that's really important is onboarding happens not just with that new person. Onboarding is so important when you change a role within an organization too. Again, some of the organizational side of it you're not going to need, but onboarding for that position, thinking about it that way, that you're going to give that person time and you're going to support them to grow into that position in the way that works for them, is going to keep them in that position longer too. It's one of the best retention strategies that I can connect to is that whole looking at onboarding as a process and making it go over time.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you, Mark. Now, as a reminder, if you have additional questions regarding orientation and onboarding that were not addressed today, please contact your consultants from the University of Minnesota. And on behalf of us, we would like to thank you for attending today's webinar. The webinar has been recorded and we will make it available for you in the future. We will actually post it to the TENNcare Workforce Initiative website. Some of you have been introduced to it. Some of you, this is the first time hearing about it, but you can see on the slide, you can go to tenncare.ici.umn.edu. It will take a few weeks for this webinar to be posted, but then you can also see the webinars in the past that we have done. You can watch those recordings as well. There is one on April 23rd called Professionalizing DSPs and Their Career Path. And that's again at 2 p.m. Central Time. In May, we will have one on the quilts program, and actually people from Tennessee will be leading that one so that you'll get the latest, most current information there, as well as the peer mentoring program. Now in June, we will have webinars on performance coaching and employee development. So you'll be receiving invitation to those webinars in the next few weeks. And thank you and have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.